when he was playing football, were you worried about him getting hurt?
Man, I would say that for probably through junior high, I kind of looked at Noah playing football like how I play football. I never worried about like injury. I had 3 concussions, 1 in high school, or 2 in high school, 1 in college. But it never crossed my mind about like, hey, is this going to have any kind of impact on my life or anything like that?
Mm-hmm.
And never thought about that with my son. But then, Noah, in one game his junior year, he fractured his jaw.
Oh.
And there was blood coming out of his mouth.
Mm.
And we had to take him to the emergency room at Children's. And he was going to have surgery that night. But, God had a whole nother plan.
Mm.
And he ended up testing positive for COVID. And because he tested positive for COVID, they halted doing the surgery. And I was kind of like, too, I was kind of tentative, like, hey, does he really need the surgery? Then we visited with the oral maxillofacial surgeon. He said, no, everything looks okay. It's going to heal well. He just couldn't eat anything. Like he had to just do liquids for a while.
Oh, wow.
But he healed up well without having to have, surgery on his jaw.
Was it broken? Did he break his jaw?
Yeah, he fractured it here and here. Yeah.
So he was a quarterback. So what happened? He just take a hit to the.
He a guy tackled him and rolled him, and as soon as he was rolling to the ground, another kid's knee ran right into his helmet.
Oh man!
And I don't know. I just think the helmet didn't work right, but at any rate,
right.
Yeah, he fractured his jaw. Fractured his jaw.
Because we have, I have a son now.
Yeah.
Brittany and I are talking like, you gonna let him play ball? Because his 2 sisters are cheerleaders.
Well,
I'm down for that, but she's like,
we could do genetic testing and stuff. I think there's ways that you can look to see if a athlete is going to have more issues with head injuries versus those that are not. Just like with autism and stuff, I think you can kind of get a little bit better appreciation of how the brain is going to handle inflammation.
You can gauge that stuff?
Yeah.
Really? Interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool.
That
is interesting.
You can't say it 100%, but I think with like 70 to 80% effectiveness, you can kind of say like, hey, and you can see other writings on the wall too. Like I think any child that has inattention or focus issues or is having like a lot of run-ins like with parents and teachers and stuff, that's probably a kiddo that if they end up getting a concussion and they take a little bit longer to recover, that their brain resiliency is not very good.
Interesting.
And you probably need to keep them out. Like there's a lot of guys in the league that take stimulant medications, like ADHD medications.
Yeah.
When you're taking ADHD medications and you're getting a head injury on top of that, that's not a good sign.
That's a dangerous.
Okay.
I forget the guy who was a wide receiver for the New England Patriots. He went to Texas Tech, but he ended up getting so many concussions and he was on a lot of ADHD medication to try to offset some of the memory stuff that he was having. And that's not a good thing to do.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we want to kick this off with a couple of different topics. One being, what is the best? I know everybody's different, but what is the best all around supplement or vitamin for a kid, for a child?
So when I do nutritional testing, I think the things that we see that are the most deficient is vitamin D. So if a child can be on a good vitamin D supplement, I think that would be something that I would be, I think, a top priority. And then I also see kiddos that have omega-3 deficits.
Okay.
So some type of fish oil supplement, I think that would be good as well.
Okay.
What's a healthy dose for kids, like just in general?
So it depends. I used to be like early on in my career, used to think about doing a lot more. Thinking about doing a lot more with fish oil, but now I'm probably recommending somewhere between 200 to 600 milligrams a day.
Okay.
And even if they miss a couple of days here or there, that's okay. I'm actually becoming more of a proponent of recommending saturated fats. So recommending a lot more tallow, ghee, coconut oil is a monosaturated fat. But beef fat, like eating red meat, those are the things that I'm really encouraging. And then also doing a lot of collagen. Okay. Collagen is another like really inexpensive supplement that you can do with children to get some rich array of amino acids in them.
I have read that if you are not getting the proper amount of fat specifically saturated fat, that you're, especially for boys and young men, that you're literally castrating yourself because your hormones are going to be out of whack.
That is correct. Because, you know,
interesting.
Cholesterol is the basic building block for all of your hormones, sex hormones, as well as like mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids. So if you're not getting those good saturated fats and you're actually having like low cholesterol levels, that's actually very problematic as well. You know, so, and if you look at like ATP production, like how much energy you get from a certain molecule, you actually get more ATP production from a saturated fat than you do from a polyunsaturated fat. And I think you guys probably have heard too, like about linoleic acid, which is the seed oils, and the seed oils, which is also just a very unnatural oil. There's a lot of chemical changes that are made to those oils, but those oils actually destroy our mitochondria, and hence part of the reason that we have so much fatigue issues is because of all of the seed oil intake.
This is omega-6.
This is omega-6.
Yeah.
Okay. That's correct.
Okay. Nines also?
Nines are
like
so nines are primarily like oleic acid, which is found in olive oil, and some olive oil is appropriate. But again, a lot of times with olive oil, a lot of products are mixed. They call them like refined oils.
Yeah.
So it has like some pure olive oil, but then it also has some tainted omega-6 oils because companies are trying to save money and, you know, get the most out of the volume that they're selling. Okay. And so it's not pure cold pressed, you know, unadulterated
single
olive
region
oil.
Olive oil, right?
So we get olive oil from the hill country here. There's some orchards out there near Austin. So we get some that is delivered directly to the home for the olive oil.
Are seed oils like a problem across the board, or is it mainly a problem once they're heated to a certain temperature?
I think like eating a pecan or eating an almond or eating a soybean, that's not going to have as deleterious effect as you having the oil. The oil, there's just so much volume of the seed that needs to be used to make just a small amount
so
of
you're just
the oil.
Getting a ton of this.
You're getting
stuff,
a ton of it.
Gotcha,
And then what people don't really talk about too, and you have to look this up, but the way that you extract the oil from the seed, there's a lot of other chemicals that are involved that the manufacturers don't tell you about what those chemicals are.
Sure.
And those chemicals are kind of evaporated off. And then the only thing that's left there is the supposed oil. But all those detergents and things that took all the hull of the nut off and things, they don't tell you about that.
But things like olive oil, things like avocado oil,
that are cold pressed,
right, that are cold pressed, yeah.
There's no heat that's being applied to it. Then I think that
so heat is a factor though in like making them problematic.
That's correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with polyunsaturated fats in general is that the way that their chemical structure is made, they are a much higher risk of like what we call oxidizing or breaking down. They have weaker bonds versus a saturated fat where all those bonds are like really strong. And that's why they're also fatty or solid at room temperature.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So like lard and stuff, that's a saturated fat. It looks yucky, but it's actually good for your body.
Sure.
Yeah.
So is there like a multi, or are you just more of a fan of like
single type of
things, like what you were saying?
Like for kids, like
for kids, and for speaking of, for kids, and then also after you answer that, what age range are you recommending and not recommending? Like, is there an age where you're too young to even worry about that? Or
I think when kiddos are younger than a year of age, I'm not really recommending any kind of multivitamin.
Sure.
Okay. Primarily they're nursing, the moms are breastfeeding or they're doing formula. They're just trying to get their palate set. But then after the age of 1, you start seeing those kids who are kind of picky, where the parents come in and tell them that they're having some problems feeding them certain things. So maybe you might look at a multivitamin. I'm like a wholesale person with doTERRA. I've been with doTERRA since 2011. But I love them because they have a medical advisory board, and there's just a lot of research and development that they do. And they have a product that's called the A to Z Chewable. And so I like that for kiddos. We carry that in the office. It's
Okay.
palatable. It does have a couple of essential oils in it as well. And it has the methylfolate and the methyl B12.
Okay.
Please, anybody who's taking any kind of multivitamin, do not take a multivitamin that contains folic acid.
Okay.
That's like a no-no.
Yeah, tell us why.
So folic acid is synthetic. And
It's what they spray on all the crops.
yeah,
Right,
so,
so when you
that's
see
that's
enriched
so that's glyphosate that they spread. Maybe you're talking about like from
Well, like when you see enriched wheat flour,
Yes.
the enrichment is they're spraying it with folic acid.
That is correct.
That's what they're calling enriched.
That's
Yeah,
right. That's
but,
enriched.
but you don't have the
Sneaky,
ability.
sneaky,
a lot of
sneaky.
people don't have the ability to break
To
folic
metabolize
acid.
it.
Yeah, exactly.
So the funny thing is that, like for moms, we encourage them, to prevent neural tube defects, to take folic acid when they're pregnant. And I don't know why the recommendation is for folic acid when we should be telling moms to take folinic acid or folate, methylfolate, or just get it in your food. Folate in its natural form and like fruits and vegetables can be utilized by the body effectively.
Okay.
But folic acid is not. There's actually an interesting podcast that came on. Oh my goodness, I think it's The Way Forward. But one of the docs on there, she's actually an MD. She went through all of the history and research about folic acid and talked about since the advent of folic acid being introduced, a rise in neurological disorders. So, before listening to that podcast, primarily I would talk about like avoiding folic acid in people that have the MTHFR issues, or they had this thing called a folate receptor 2 disorder, or FLR2. But now I think across the board, we just need to get folic acid out of the diet.
So back to D3 for the parents. How can kids get more D3 into their system? Because we know sunlight, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. That's right. So it's interesting. With my last conference, I was kind of doing some side research. And did you know that most of our vitamin D products, they're made from lanolin? So lanolin comes from sheep's wool. So they take the sheep's wool, they break it down to where they get like the liquid form of the lanolin. They actually irradiate it with a certain kind of UV light, or I can't remember what the light range is, and they get the vitamin D. So that's what we take orally. But I've started doing a lot of like just taking lanolin, the cream, and applying it to the skin, because it's the same product that you're using in vitamin D. And then just having the natural sunlight help break that lanolin down on the skin at the skin level and have that be converted into our vitamin D.
Wow.
So
And then-
lanolin, also called wool fat, wool yolk, wool wax, et cetera, is a wax secreted from the sebaceous glands of wool-bearing animals.
That's correct.
Okay. That's
And
cool.
and we
You just get
and,
the
and we
cream of it?
we used to recommend it. I used to recommend it for long, like way back in the days, for moms that were nursing if the nipple areas were cracked from breastfeeding, and it was very effective. It almost has the consistency of like Vaseline.
Okay.
But it's really, really good, especially like when it's cold outside
Huh.
and you get that chapped type of skin. Lanolin could be very, very effective.
So using it on like affected areas or just anywhere? I mean,
Anywhere. I
okay.
try to put it on my sun exposed areas of my body so that
Okay.
when I'm going outside,
yeah.
I'm getting some of that natural vitamin D production as
Hey,
a result
that's a
of
good
that.
question though. What do you think about sunscreen in general?
I'm not a fan of it.
You're not?
No.
Let's go.
Across the
not.
board?
I think that there are sunscreens that are blockers. The sunscreens that are the blockers, like the zinc oxide, titanium dioxide, those I think are going to be safer. But any kind of sunscreen that ends in the OZONE, the ozones, those transform so the sunlight, when it hits that, it transforms those chemicals into what I feel like, again, some individuals in research may not agree with it, but turning those chemicals into more cancerous agents.
Interesting.
So, and it's interesting too. Like, I think when you look at skin cancer, probably one of the populations that's going to have the most sun exposure is at the equator. But you don't have the highest amount of skin cancer.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
At the equator.
Yeah, man. Because listen, I mean, Brittany and I, we don't wear sunscreen. We won't put it on the kids. She won't put it on the kids.
Yeah.
Now listen, I mean, we go to Florida a lot.
Uh-huh.
We're in the sun, but we do it to we time the day out where we're in the sun for maybe an hour, 2 hours, you know, in and out of shade.
Right.
You know, we're not just sitting there on the beach for 8 hours
Right,
baking,
right.
getting hurt.
Yeah.
But it's
You're
like
being smart about it.
well, yeah. It's like, you know, but how can one say get vitamin D from the sun and then, you know, on the other side of that say coat yourself with this chemical cream
Yeah,
to block it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, we don't use it.
What about like zinc?
You mean orally?
Topical zinc, like
Yeah.
that-
Well, so the zinc oxide, as I was mentioning.
zinc oxide. I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah.
It's almost like the diaper cream that a lot of folks use, you know, for their babies. But that's a nice blocker, especially for I think the fairer skinned you are, you probably do have a little bit more risk of having, you know, burns.
Yeah, I get
And-
burnt easily.
And that's the thing. It's like,
yes, you,
Yeah.
yes, you do.
yeah.
I get fried pretty easily.
and you
I got to
know-
put on something.
And I would say one thing too about that is I think it's almost like you're trying to develop some sun endurance. So I
Yeah.
think like the longer you spend time outside,
Mhm.
Mhm.
the more your skin will start to get accustomed to the
Sure,
UV light.
Sure.
But if you're an individual who's like primarily indoors and you just go like on a summer vacation somewhere,
yeah.
Oh yeah. You
you know,
smoke, dude.
you're probably going
Dangerous
to
for
need
sure.
to use more sunscreen.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So let me ask you this. We were talking earlier. There's not a lot of like info on it, but what about protein for kids?
Protein.
Protein.
Oh, you know,
Supplementation or real food, you mean?
No, I mean both, but like you know,
Yeah.
we were talking, we were like, you know,
We're talking about like protein bars, basically.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
kids love those, and I'm like, I don't know if you should have, you know,
so you need to look at those
20,
protein
30
bars.
grams of protein
like
in it, you know.
yeah.
Yeah, you need to look at those protein bars too, because like we were talking about with the seed oils and stuff, you know, so the protein might be good, but then there's all those other fillers
There's a
and
bunch
stuff
of junk in it. Yeah.
that are in there. So you want to, you want to avoid that. But I think you got to go back to the kids and ask the parents the history. And if the parents say like, hey, we're doing some meat products, my child's doing maybe a couple of different nut butters, then I'm not really too worried about like their protein intake.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But if you have a kid who's like really just carb driven, they eat a lot of bread, pastas, and not doing anything with like the meat based products, then that's a child that I do worry about.
Sure.
Are they getting enough protein in the diet?
But- Is there-
the nutritional food pyramid?
Oh,
man.
yeah.
We should
Yeah.
be eating
The
so
food
many
pyramid
breads.
disagrees with
Yeah.
you, Dr. Naidoo.
What?
Yeah, can you show me?
You're supposed to be a doctor.
It's been
You should
some
look it
time.
up.
Like, what is the new?
Oh, it changes.
If I remember, I think Kellogg's or something did
Yep.
some kind of like food pyramid thing, and they said like Fruit Loops or cornflakes or something is
Uh-huh.
like at the top of the food
Yeah.
chain.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
So,
Focus on
Yeah.
whole food.
50% of your diet should be whole grains like wheat bread, oatmeal, brown
yeah,
rice.
which
and
is
wheat
completely
crackers.
the antithesis of
Yeah.
what we recommend in the practice. Yeah.
So
We actually in our practice for moms when they're starting to introduce solids for their children, we usually tell them to do the grains at the end. Like we want to do vegetables, we want to expose them to fruits. We want to do some like they can do some organ meats, eggs,
mhm.
beans, nut butters, and then do the grains at the very end.
Yeah.
Most children, if you look at like what they're acclimated to when they get older,
Yeah.
you never hear a parent saying, "My child doesn't eat enough carbs."
Yeah.
Right. Because I
Right.
mean, so like in my house,
Yeah, look at that right there. That
Oh,
I think
look at
what's
that.
at the top is like what's emphasized in some of these other food pyramids.
The top is what's like the least, right?
yeah,
Yeah,
Right. So
go ahead, Evan.
no, so you have fats, oils, meat, poultry, fish, milk, yogurts, cheese, and then all the way at the bottom, 5 to 7 servings a day of fruit. Wait, is this the
this is the appropriate one.
this is the good one?
Yeah, this is the
this
good
This is the
good
good
one.
Okay, I was like, wait a minute. This actually seems right.
This has 3 to 5 servings a day of whole meal and whole grain, and also when they say
Oh,
for
yeah.
milk, they say choose reduced fat or low fat.
Okay,
varieties.
right. Okay.
They're
Okay.
demonizing fat,
correct,
and they're
correct.
grouping it.
This
and,
one's different though.
and they're grouping fat all into the same category: fats, spreads, and oils. And we just discussed the differences
this is
between
very
saturated
different.
get that
fat.
Very
margarine in there,
like
baby.
like margarine,
margarine
like
in
what
there.
my mom used to give
Yeah.
me growing up, the shed spread. That's
Yeah.
horrible. You know,
I can't believe it's not butter.
Yeah,
Get that spray butter, bro. Did you get that spray butter?
I
and
can't
you're
believe
also
it's not
getting the
butter.
propellant in that too.
Yeah. No, it's crazy. So in my house, dude, my kids, we love eggs. My kids love eggs.
Eggs are awesome.
Red meats.
Yeah.
Veggies, fruit.
So there's this other kind of philosophy that my wife and I have talked about. And again, I think that there's some research to say that like being vegan or vegetarian can be healthy.
Mm.
But I think too, like one of the things if you're going to go down that whole vegan vegetarian route, you have to have accessibility to food all the time. Because usually those individuals are always hungry.
Yeah.
Because that's the whole purpose of like saturated fats. You eat a good steak, you can go several hours without eating, and your body can break down that fat and convert it into the proper energy that you need. That's what people talk about, like ketosis and stuff. So sometimes it's healthy not to eat so much, but in our communities, there's food everywhere.
Okay.
So if you have food everywhere, and then you have a kiddo who's like eating, good piece of steak or, other kind of red meat, and then they're eating like, snacks that are full of carbs, that's just defeating the purpose of eating the red meat, because now you've eaten all those carbs along with it,
Yeah.
So I think the main thing with the vegan-based diet is if you're going to be vegan, you're going to have to be ready to eat all the time to feel invigorated. Most people who are vegan and who go a while without eating, they're very lethargic, tired.
What about veganism for kids?
You have to be watchful of it. You have to look and see like what's happening with the children on their weight curves. Every time we see children for their annual visits, we do something that's called a growth chart. So we're able to see like where they're plotting for their growth. And we've had some kids who have, the parents are very, vigilant that they want their child to be vegan, but you can see that the child is not growing well. And we actually had 2 kids that end up having rickets because the parents were adamant about like not doing any kind of meat-based products, not doing any kind of dairy. And those children had very, very low vitamin D levels and then hence low calcium levels. And they were pretty sick.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
So this can kind of allow us to segue into the next topic, which is medicine versus food, right? Or letting food be your medicine. So those 2 cases that you just had, what is rickets for people that don't know?
So rickets is where a patient doesn't have high enough vitamin D levels that they can't absorb the calcium that they're getting in the diet. And so hence they become very low for their calcium. And so the body, its way to help keep up with that low calcium is it starts to break down the bone, because your bone harbors a lot of calcium. And if the body says, hey, I don't have enough calcium, it'll pull it from the bone. And then what ends up happening is the child's bones get really brittle. There's a lot of what we call like bowing. You hear about like being, what is it called? Bow-legged.
Yeah.
So really excessive bow-leggedness. You get expansion of the wrist because the bones are so active and breaking down. And they're at risk for fractures and those kind of things.
So this says children on vegan diets had about 5% lower bone mineral content and were on average 3 centimeters shorter in height.
That's correct.
Very interesting.
So can
it's
you
definitely
reverse
affecting
that?
the bones.
You can reverse it?
You can, yeah. But the parents have to have that buy-in, like I think there's just such a like vegan kick, no meat type of thing. And you have to be cautious about it. Like you can get a lot of protein from like lentils and nuts and seeds, but you have to be intentional about that. And which kid do you know that like loves lentils or loves the nuts and the seeds?
Right.
Sure.
So that's the challenge.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Kids commonly have a sweet tooth, right? How do you balance that in moderation, A, I guess, and then B, how do you curve a sweet tooth for a kid? Because let me tell you this. Coral, my middle girl, bro, we'll have like semi-sweet little like dark cacao like morsels like hidden in the top of the pantry.
She'll find.
Bro, she's like on 5 shelves. Like, and she's like,
it's like she's got
she's like a little bitty,
that
dude.
sweet dar.
Dude. She's
Sweet
like
radar.
scaled the whole pantry and then to get these morsels, bro.
She's going to get those chocolates,
And I'm like, what do you do? But
Fat first.
Yeah,
For my
so-
kids, I lead with a thing of fat first, fat and
Oh, that's
protein
interesting.
first,
Okay.
and then
Then you can have that dessert or that
they'll
sweet
have the
thing.
sweet tooth, but it's incredibly diminished by how much they can consume.
Is fat first, is the intention of that to fill them up a little bit more?
Yeah, to satiate them.
Gotcha. Okay.
I know for
I
my
like that.
children now that are in high school, I try to be really intentional about making them like sausage in the morning, I get deer meat that's made into
Nice.
sausages that I try to make for them. And then I have a hard boiled egg for them. I'm not the biggest cook. I try to be efficient in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Us too.
So, but they like that, you know. So I think that that's like a good way to start the day. I think if kids could start the day with like more fat and protein, and really even try to minimize the carbs, and almost like put the kid into a little bit of ketosis, maybe,
Mhm.
because ketones are a much better fuel for the brain.
Mhm.
And then maybe if they want to get their carbs later in the day, like at lunch, fine. But then I'm also trying to get feedback from the parents of like, hey, how's school going in the morning? Oh yeah, teacher says little Johnny's really locked in, paying attention. But then after lunch, we have a different story. Well, then I tell the parents, well, then you need to be mindful of like what kind of carbs and stuff your kiddos are eating at lunch.
Right.
That's impacting the way that they're able to complete that second half of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you also have some kids who are really lean, very low body fat. And I think sometimes the kids that have the cravings for the sweets,
Mhm.
I don't know that I used to think a lot of the times that was like more yeast related.
Mhm.
But if I don't see yeast on exam, like I don't see really bad cradle cap, I don't see issues behind the ears. They don't have like quote unquote like eczema in the creases. They don't have anything like in the private areas, like we call it in the inguinal creases.
Mhm.
Then I'm thinking a lot less about yeast. And maybe this is a child that just they need energy. I mean, sugar is energy,
Yeah.
right? So if they're really lean, they need that. So what I try to tell those parents is you really need to try to push to get more complex carbs
Mhm.
for those kids, so they get a slower distribution of those sugars,
Mhm.
so they're not craving it as much.
Well, I like what you said about timing it, though. That's really interesting.
Yeah,
That
You
is.
know, that's really
Yeah.
interesting because that makes a lot of sense, especially for like cognitive focus and things like that, you know,
Yeah.
in the classroom. Because I didn't, for the longest time, and still even really now naturally, like I have to force myself to eat breakfast.
yeah.
And my oldest, like she's not hungry in the mornings.
And then,
You know?
and I think that's like another interesting thing too, is like, you know, you kind of see what people's natural bents are.
Mhm.
And if your natural bent is not to have, like, you know, some people say like, breakfast is your most important meal of the day.
Right.
I don't know that that's necessarily true.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Agreed.
think if you have a patient who is not having breakfast and they're on it, you know, they're focused and they're intentional about what they're doing, you leave them alone.
Not having hunger pains.
Correct.
And everything. Yeah.
Mhm.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Because that's like for me, I've learned as I've gotten older, especially like in my military days, hey, I don't do really well when I have a big breakfast. So I don't eat breakfast now.
Yeah.
I really don't even have lunch. I know some of the staff even tell me like, hey, I need to even eat. But I do eat, but it's in a much more compressed window of time, which is like usually when I get home from work.
Did you have like a big dinner?
Yeah, I make up for my calories.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, when I have my evening meal, but
What does that look like? Is it
Yeah.
steak?
yeah, I try to have meat
Yeah.
every time for dinner. But if not, then I'll do yogurt. I'll have ghee. I'll kind of like what is it called? Like nutritional hack.
Mhm.
I'll put all different kinds of things in my concoction. You know,
Okay.
Yeah.
to get my fat in my protein.
I like yogurt's a good way to sneak in the protein, dude,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
the fats. I love that.
Yeah, I mix in like, collagen into my yogurt. I'll use honey. I use a lot of honey.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I was doing collagen in my coffee for the longest time.
I was too, actually.
Dude, you could sneak in
You don't even taste
10
it, man.
grams
You
of
don't taste it.
protein.
No.
You can't
No,
taste
it's
it.
easy.
Right.
10 grams of protein per scoop. So I was having 2 cups of coffee in the morning before. It's 20 grams of protein.
That's
right
correct.
there, dude, just
Yeah.
in the collagen.
That is correct. I mean, a rich array of amino acids
Yeah.
too. You get everything.
I need to start that back up. The brand that we were getting was from New Zealand. But
Yeah.
they don't do that anymore. I don't think they don't manufacture it anymore.
Oh,
We
It
used
was-
Vital Farms
It
for
was
a while.
a black container from
Uh-huh.
New Zealand. I forget the name of it. Brittany,
it was
ordered
it was
all the
in
time.
Noble Origins. Or-
I can't remember, man. I just
Okay.
remember that it was black, and then we talked about it the other day. Because I was like, we need to get some more. She's like, I can't find it anywhere. I think they discontinued it. You use Vital Forms?
I did, yeah.
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 I
And what
love
did you
it,
say,
man. I mean,
Noble
you know,
Origin?
again, you
yeah,
don't taste it,
Noble Origin. Then there's the one that's commonly like you find it at Sprouts and Whole Foods called Vital Protein.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a blue. They also have a marine collagen.
That was the one.
too.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Brett, do you do collagen?
I have an issue with collagen because I know it comes primarily, the ones that you guys are talking about comes from the bovine skin and the hide. And so it's not exactly as bioavailable as you'd like it to be. And it's not protein in the sense that we think like muscle repair. It's
Dude.
more for your joints and your skin. The best way hands down, the best way to get collagen is bone broth.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes,
Okay.
we encourage
Okay.
a lot of bone
Yeah.
broth as well.
Yeah.
Well, you just kind of like dampened my vibe.
I'm just devil's advocate, though. I mean, look,
I thought I was kicking my day off with 20 grams of straight protein.
look, if you're out there and you have collagen in your coffee every morning and you love it and it makes you feel great, keep doing it. Right?
That's the thing. It's doing something.
Well, I was
You
just
know, at
tolerating
the
it
end of
because
the
I
day.
thought it was giving me some muscle.
Hey, the mind is more powerful than anything else. And if you think it's
pretty
working,
swole,
it's
doing
working.
something.
Yeah, well,
It's
thanks, man.
it's definitely working.
Well, no, he can't find it anymore. He stopped doing it. Look
Yeah,
how big he is
that's
now.
That's
Thank
true.
you for supporting my
Man,
point.
so yes.
So I want to ask you this. So to a new mom who is just had a child and freaking out about everything about it, right? It's a really scary time. What are some lessons or some words of wisdom that you could give to her, just in terms of overall health, diet, sleep, the entire thing? How can you raise a healthy child?
I think one of the things that I always ask families when they have a newborn is what's their support network?
Yeah.
So if their nucleus family is in the area, then I think grandmas are like the best resource for a new mom.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a lot of families who are overextended or they, they're not anywhere close to where their nucleus family is.
Yeah.
So maybe there's like quote unquote a mom that's in the church or, their group. But if not, then they have to use us as a resource for them to help them get through things. And when you start to say what is the best resource? I mean, there's so much information that's out there on things. I don't know. I wish I could tell you there's just this one go-to resource. I like Children's Health Defense. I like Wise Traditions.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are some resources that I feel like have been balanced in the recommendations that they give families for raising a healthy child.
Yeah.
But I definitely wouldn't recommend the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very disappointed in how they've approached vaccines, how they've approached COVID.
Yeah.
And then you look at you get a journal from the American Academy of Pediatrics and it has all these advertisements in it that are all pharma driven,
Oh yeah.
So you just follow the money and you're like, hey, well, what, is the content that's really in this journal truly what these researchers believe, or is it being funded by,
Man, when you do you and your staff and clinic, your practice, y'all do a great job with resources.
Mhm.
I mean, just when you go on the website, when you go into the room, there's pamphlets and then the content that y'all create, the handouts, the app.
Yeah.
I mean, just
that's important, man. That's
Brittany
so
and I,
helpful.
because it is, man. Because when Cove was born, this was almost 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Like I've said several times on the show, and we've talked about, we felt alone on our journey.
Yeah. With
Until
some of the decisions that you made.
Yeah.
Right.
But thank God for you and your staff, because for once we had, a practitioner who
feel
was
empowered.
Yeah, man. It was okay, somebody is with us and isn't looking at us like we have two heads, and I don't
somebody's
feel,
reaffirming choices that you guys have made.
Major
That's important.
A lot of resources from you. So thank you for that.
We researched all of it. I try to go through the literature as much as I can, and we have a lot of intellectual property in the practice. We have the Shepherd platform now. That's kind of our internal social media platform for just our families.
Yeah.
So we can be a little bit intimate in the conversations that we need to talk about on things.
Yeah.
But we're just very thankful that we're in that situation, and then you spread the word and you tell other families about us, and they can come into that kind of place of refuge and feel, hey, I have somebody in my corner that gets me, that understands me. And we just continue to keep influencing, the DFW area and beyond. And so other parents talk to parents in other states and hey, I'm talking to my doctor in New York about this, or in California about this. We make those kind of changes, and you could see it now. I mean, at a grassroots level, oh my gosh, you got these young 20-something-year-old parents, 30-year-old parents, and they want something different than what the AAP is recommending.
Yeah.
And they're going to get it. They're going to find a way to find that medical provider that is going to be like-minded with what they believe in.
Dude, Brittany and his wife Katie, they put a poll out on Instagram today for a few questions for you for this show. 10 years ago, when we would talk about vaccines, Brittany and I lost friends. People were like, what are you talking about? Now, through this poll, you make friends, bro. And people, one of the topics that we'll get to later is vaccine alternatives and or schedule delay. But we can get that into that in a minute. But I'm saying all that because there has been a shift, and thank God for it, man. And you're on the front lines for that, so you're playing a vital role.
No,
for
that's
that,
important, man. So I was never vaccinated as a kid. My mom and dad were, hippies in the 80s. I was, traveled the world, got infections, got viruses, illnesses. I've been fine. So no, I think it's really interesting. I do feel like it's kind of coming back to a time now when it's like more people are much more open to at very least having a discussion about it. Because before, when you guys had Cove, when we had Berkeley, there wasn't even a discussion to be had, man. It was like, if you guys are going against this, you guys are going against the science and you're idiots and your child's going to die and all this. And now we're seeing there's so much more science that says, hey, there's valid reasons for not doing this or doing it in a different way.
Correct.
Doing it on a different schedule, right?
Correct. That's right.
Yeah. What is this?
This is off topic, but it's back to the idea of fat doesn't cause fat, carbs cause fat. And so this is at the dawn of agriculture, they found consistently across the board that not only were humans fatter and their jaw sizes shrunk, but that they also were shorter.
Interesting. Did humans become shorter after agriculture? Populations around the world become shorter after the transition to agriculture. I saw a thing the other day where people were saying that there was something that was making people look younger. Have you heard about this?
No.
Something like if you look at like people in their 20s and 30s back in like the 80s, 70s, dude, people look like they're like our dads. It's crazy,
especially in the 70s.
Yeah,
like this. You see those old crime shows, and it's like this 25-year-old male, and he's like, he looks 52.
Yeah, but there's even, and it's like even beyond like facial hair and like styling and all that. It's just they look older, they look heavier.
I think
the cast of Cheers was
I think you see it in kids right now. There's something that's called telomere testing. There's some debate about whether that is the most accurate way to look at aging.
Yeah.
But, the shorter our telomeres are, the more we are likely aging more quickly. And, I think part of aging is the rest part. Like if we don't rest, and most kids don't rest enough. Now with all the artificial lighting, so many activities and stuff going on, parents working, daycares opening up early, school starting early. I actually had a debate with our staff about like, hey, why don't we just open up a little bit later and close a little bit earlier and work through lunch? We don't have any kind of lunch. And we get people, coming to work just a little bit later and leave a little bit earlier so they can enjoy being away from, the office.
Yeah. What was the feedback that you got for your staff?
Oh, Dr. Naidoo, it's going to be hard on scheduling and stuff like that. I'm like, well, we're going to make it happen. We're going to make it happen.
Yeah.
It's going to be a matter of time.
Cool.
You're all fasting and nobody.
Yeah, right.
So I think what has to happen is when we have daylight savings, whenever we make that change, that's when we need to make the change with the schedule.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I think that would, because I tell you, because I would wake up early and go to work. And then when you get off work, it's already dark. It's dark when you leave to go to work. It's dark when you come home.
Family earlier.
You're in the winter blues. Yeah, it really messes with you. That's a good idea, man.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Sometimes I'll fall asleep and I'm listening to a podcast or something. And I'm actually going to delve into this thing have you heard of alchemy?
Mm-hmm.
What is it?
Alchemy. It's back in the day they used to mix potions. It was kind of like chemistry. But
chemistry.
Okay. I can't even really. So there's a gentleman I'm reading the book right now. The book is called Fool's Wisdom. Stephen Young. Oh my gosh, fascinating gentleman in how he breaks down science. And it just took me down all these different paths. But one of the things that we have to learn is like, how do we eat and how do we live life in accordance with nature? Like when the sun comes up, when the sun goes down, when it's the equinox, when it's the summer solstice, winter solstice, like there's all these things that we could do better for our bodies if we were more in sync with nature. And I remember going to Cancun and going to one of the Mayan ruins, and they talked about how the women really paid attention to the moon cycles for their menstrual cycles.
Oh,
So there's really some very unique things that our physiology does in accordance with nature. And I'm going to really delve into that in this next year. But this gentleman, he's actually a physicist and he's an astrophysicist. And what he talks about, because I was a biomedical engineer in undergrad, and he's like, everything I learned in college about physics, I couldn't use it when I went to my real job because everything that I was taught about physics was theoretical. So he talks about like theoretical physics and practical physics. And the practical physics is necessary. That's what you need in engineering. That's what you need for construction and those kind of things. But then there's this whole other side of things that we get caught up in. That's the theoretical side that never really amounts to anything. You hear about all the stuff with quantum and quantum theory and, quantum physics. And he's like, all of that stuff is like more a mental masturbation. It's not really what's relevant to how we do things. In
Even you look at like, in the Middle East and, biblical times, everything was around the moon cycles, agriculture, I mean, everything.
Agriculture.
The holy festival days. I mean, it was all around that, dude.
That's right.
So, I mean, we've gotten away from that for sure.
And that's what
Western culture.
There's a lecture I was just listening to about cell salts. And I heard about cell salts from my homeopathic kind of experiences, but that may have some relevance in all of this as well and, how to use them. So, there's a whole other field of medicine that I'm going to delve into.
That's exciting.
That is exciting, man.
I'm
You'll be great at
I'm
that,
excited to learn from you as you trailblaze that, man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be cool. But if y'all get a chance to listen to that book, it's really
okay.
I have it on Audible. Really good. Steve Young.
Cool.
So let's move on to the next topic:
the vaccine versus vaccine and vaccine schedule delay. Okay, yeah. Run us through that, because I mean, we're just trying to help inform and educate just parents.
You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so we want to be able to equip parents with the necessary tools that they can ask their pediatrician if they can't come see you.
Yeah.
And we may have briefly talked about it the last time, but the main thing that I would tell a parent is if you take your child into the doctor's office and you don't have a lot of questions and your child's very healthy, they don't have any skin issues, they don't have any gastrointestinal issues, they're sleeping really well. It's almost like, hey, I kind of don't know why I'm here, doc. Like everything's going fine. Well, then maybe that's the kiddo that if you are open to a vaccine, you can look at doing one. But if you go into that doctor's appointment and, some mamas and dads have like, a list of questions. If I have a parent that has a list of questions, that's automatically kind of a way for me to say like, hey, we're not ready to touch the subject of vaccines right now because there's so much other stuff that's going on. And then when it comes to the immunizations, I think the main thing that we try to focus on in the first 2 years of life is the bacterial vaccines, because the child's blood-brain barrier is a little bit more permeable. So there's a possibility that when you have infections in the head and neck area, that those infections could spread up into the brain and cause the most serious thing called meningitis. And that's why we have the HIV vaccine, the HIB, and the strep pneumonia vaccine is to prevent bacterial meningitis. So those are more relevant vaccines. And then obviously the pertussis vaccine is there for the whooping cough, which is known as the 100-day cough. And that can be a very, very debilitating and potentially life-threatening illness if a newborn gets it, or a very, very young baby less than 6 weeks of age. They can actually stop breathing with having pertussis. So those are the kind of vaccines that I put on the radar for parents to think about. And then for the viral vaccines like hepatitis B, polio, MMR, chickenpox, Hep A, then we can look at those after the age of 2 and really talk to the families and say like, hey, where are you? What's your research? What have you done? What kind of, what are you thinking about? And then we can phase those in if we want. And my goal with vaccines is never to worry about getting them caught up by the CDC schedule. We want to make sure that if we're going to do vaccines, we're doing them one at a time, spaced out by at least 3 to 4 weeks between each one. And just making sure that the patient is not naive in the sense of not receiving any of those vaccines, but maybe just looking at one of each one. And then I tell parents too, once we've done one of each vaccine, if you really are gung-ho about doing boosters right away, we can check the blood to see if they have titers. And if they have the antibodies to those vaccines that we've given them, why give them another dose when their body is showing that they have that antibody protection? And that's a part in the research. Like that's what the Children's Health Defense has done a really good job. And even the Turtles Down Under book. And I did my own internal research from 2006 to 2010, is that there is not good research or studies that have been done on how effective a vaccine is after it's given. And then did we check titers? How effective is a vaccine when we give like 9 at one time? How does the body respond to all 9 of those? Do they develop antibodies to them? Because when I practice medicine traditionally, if we gave a child 9 vaccines at 2 months of age and 9 at 4 months of age and 9 at 6 months of age, and then we check their titers when they're after the age of 1, a lot of them didn't have protection to many of those vaccines that were given. And the reason that we checked those titers is because the child kept getting sick, even when they got all the vaccines. So, I mean, we can go into hours of what is happening to the immunology of our children when we give them so many vaccines at the 2, 4, and 6 month old, and what it is doing to actually kind of dumb down the immune system. So then the immune system can't respond as effectively to other antigens that it's exposed to, other illnesses that they're exposed to.
It sounds kind of like if you are going to negate vaccines or delay vaccines, you really need to be sure as a parent that you're leading a kind of lifestyle that supports. I mean, like kids got to be eating super healthy. Kids got to be in the sun. Kids got to be doing all of this, very, very clean, healthy lifestyle stuff as much as they can.
I would definitely,
it goes
agree.
up and down.
And I would say daycare goes into that.
Yeah, sure.
When you have children that are enrolled in daycare, and that constant exposure to all of those different, microbes there.
Right.
And one thing that parents, I don't think that people are very aware of is you don't really know how a kid feels when they go to daycare. You just think, hey, little Johnny's going to daycare. He's 2 months old. He might be crying. He's fussy. He doesn't like the routine.
Yeah.
Who's this person taking care of me? He or she might be so stressed out by going to daycare. That's weakening the terrain of the kiddo.
Sure.
And you know it, like when kids get older, you have some kids, you send them to school, it's like, hey, they don't even want to talk to you. They want to go hang out with their friends. But there's a lot of kids, when you drop them off at school, they don't want to be there. School is not where they want to be.
Yeah.
And so for those children where school is not where they want to be, don't you think that happens in the infant period too, in daycare? So I think that's really important to think about as well.
Yeah. So do you think that
look at that. 50 vaccines before they turn 18.
Children receive more than 50 vaccines before they turn 18.
That's absurd.
So
kind of crazy.
You're a parent at birth. So this says hepatitis B at birth. Is this one of the viral ones or one of the bacterial ones?
This is a viral one. So I make rounds at the hospital a lot, with newborns, and the nursing staff kind of knows me that like, hey, Dr. Naidoo doesn't want his patients to get the hepatitis B vaccine, because the reason I don't want to do it is because we test these moms before they deliver, and we know what their hepatitis B status is. So if I have a mother who has a negative hepatitis B status, why am I giving the vaccine right then and there? Yeah. And these vaccines too contain aluminum. Yeah. So what kind of impact is aluminum having?
All of the vaccines contain aluminum?
All of the Hep B vaccines do. Yeah. So we're giving that, to these newborns. And then if the child starts to have like problems with feeding, or they're not sleeping well, or they're colic, how much of that is related to those interventions that we did, when if we just left that baby alone, maybe it's a different story. And I've seen it, clinically over the last 12, 13 years of doing this, since 2010, you get a better feel for what is the true like ecology of that kiddo. Yeah. And we have a lot less jaundice issues. We don't have as many kids getting phototherapy and all these kind of things. One of the things that really frustrates me about male children is we give them the Hep B vaccine, then we give them Tylenol, and then we circumcise them. And so those boys are getting all that trauma at the very beginning. Jeez. And then you wonder like, well, why does he have jaundice? Well, you just taxed his liver. You gave him a vaccine.
Both of my kids had jaundice and they were vaccinated, I assume, in the proper way.
Yeah. And then another thing that if you read the package insert for vitamin K, so some vitamin K formulations still have aluminum in it. So now you're giving the child a vitamin K that has aluminum with the hepatitis B, or even vitamin K has benzoyl peroxide in it, or benzoyl alcohol. And benzoyl alcohol is known to cause jaundice issues. You stress the liver. So I think I try to tell the nurses in the hospital, I was like, take a step back. Okay. What happens if we don't do these things? Well, nothing's going to happen. Exactly. So just be slow. Like, I think that's like one of the most common, like when people ask me like what integrated pediatrics is just being like learning to have the courage to be hands off and leave the child alone and let them grow.
Yeah.
The power comes from having the ability to act and refusing to do so.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There
And
you
you simply start by just asking the question, what would happen if we didn't?
But what is
Do
hepatitis?
this.
Where does it come from? It's a viral infection.
So have you guys had any folks on that believe that say that viruses aren't real?
Let's
No.
roll.
Not
Let's
yet.
get it.
Oh, let's go. Take me down that road.
Let's just say that I think that when we test people for viruses, we are testing for real information in terms of like the genetic code. I think you guys know about like G, T, A, and C, the nucleotides that make up different viruses or even our own DNA. But I would say that I'm starting to appreciate that maybe some of the testing that we do on patients for different sorts of infections, whether we're just testing our own genetic code that is like coming out to play when we get really stressed out, when we don't feel well, maybe we, travel a lot, maybe we don't sleep as much. And so then this kind of genetic code comes out. And when we test the patients, that's what we're testing for. So then that changes the whole dynamic of like contagion.
Right.
So if you're sick and you cough on me, I mean, a lot of people think, oh my gosh, you coughed on me, I'm going to get sick. But that's not the case. There's been a lot of studies that show that when people are sick, it's probably about maybe 50 or 60% of the time that the individual will contract it. But then there's 50% of people who don't.
That don't, yeah.
Could this be why masks don't work?
Well, yeah, there's
right.
So I worry about the mask piece more for the carbon dioxide retention and what that is doing to weaken the terrain of an individual. One of the things that came from like looking at mask is, like people get sick a lot of times when they travel, when they fly. And I'm thinking, why do people get sick when they fly or when they travel? Well, do you know that when you fly in a plane, the plane goes up to about 30,000 feet, but the cabin is not pressurized to the same level of where you are at ground level. It's pressurized up to about 10,000 feet. So you literally have a level of hypoxia when you travel on a plane. So that lack of oxygen that you are getting when you're flying, do you think that's going to have a negative impact on your health?
That's very interesting.
You're not getting adequate oxygen.
Yeah.
So I think, the more and more you read up on about terrain theory and how important it is to keep your constitution really strong, it makes you think a whole different paradigm. And that's kind of like what Steve Young talks about in A Fool's Wisdom and stuff too, that maybe all this microbe stuff that we're talking about, we've been talking about it in a completely wrong context. Like, for instance, I went to a medical conference about a month ago, and there was a doctor there who is giving patients parasites, worms, to help cure them of some of their autoimmune disorders.
Oh,
interesting.
So, she made a really good, it was a really great presentation. And I'm not a zoologist and stuff, but it's interesting, like when you look at animal biospheres and how like there's so much dependency on each animal in there. And if you take one animal out, how it can potentially destroy that entire, ecosystem.
Right.
And so I think that's what we are doing a lot of times when we just blast these kids and, patients with a lot of antibiotics, and we're thinking like, okay, we're taking care of that microbe right there. But what's the other collateral damage from all the other microbes that now are able to thrive more because you destroyed that one?
Man,
so
I want to go back
to
to your theory about viruses again real quick.
I know it. This is wild.
So, okay, how in that theory, how do you explain the contagion aspect of it?
So when we have a patient who's not feeling well and their nose is running and stuff and they're coughing, and we have these tests that we can do where we swab the nose, we send it off to the lab and they do, it's PCR testing, right? Polymerase chain reaction. And with that, we can pick up different sorts of genetic sequences in that specimen. And we say, okay, this genetic sequence matches up with this virus, or this genetic sequence matches up with this bacteria. And so now we know, okay, that patient has these type of bacteria or viruses. Well, in our current level of like training and education, we would say that that patient got that virus or that bacteria from somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. But you ask, you're like, well, is anybody else sick in the home? No, they're not in daycare. Where did this come from? Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
So I've delved a little bit more to kind of ask questions like, well, is there any other stressors? Like, is there domestic issues? Are mom and dad arguing or fighting? Is there a new person that came into the home? Is Wi-Fi, like, is there a lot more electromagnetic fields in the home?
Yeah.
Like, is the baby, did y'all move to a different home? Those kind of things.
Uh-huh.
So I'm asking a lot more about like other external stressors that might be going on that could weaken that person's constitution and cause that genetic material that we're testing to actually be coming from them and not from somebody else.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's fascinating.
So so the terrain theory then basically taking. Man, that's interesting.
And there's another movie that is out. I think it's called Viral Delusions.
Like a documentary?
Yeah, a documentary. Okay. And I only watched the first one because it's free. The other parts you got to pay for it. So I'm going to eventually get to that. But I don't want to pay for anything. I'm not going to be locked in and be able to do it.
Yeah.
But I watched that first one, and it's just, there's just so much that we've learned over the years in science that may not actually be true.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
what's interesting about this
right?
terrain theory is this didn't happen the other day a few weeks ago when we were talking about it, but I just Googled terrain theory, and what pops up on Wikipedia is germ theory denialism.
Yes.
Germ theory denialism.
It's two competing philosophies.
Right.
And it's a
but
long...
they don't call it terrain theory
It wasn't called that a few weeks ago when we Googled it.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Louis Pasteur was one of the, world-renowned scientists who talked, he was like kind of the forefront of germ theory. And some people say that, and again, I don't know if this is true or not, but on his deathbed, he said, maybe I was wrong about this.
Wow.
So I think I think there's a lot more players involved when you start, and there's a lot more financial kind of gains and rewards when you can say something's a contagion versus the personal accountability.
Of course.
Take care of health.
Sure.
And it is ridiculous kind of to make the point that it's germ theory denialism when Harvard releases a study that 70% of the immune system is in the gut.
Yeah.
And so it's
100%.
There's a lot there that's untold that's basically
very
saying
dirty. Yeah.
that if
the
your
gut
terrain is proper and good,
Yeah.
your immune system will be better. You might not get
Well,
sick.
and I think as science progresses, as technology progresses, I think we're getting to a place where asking questions like that can potentially enlighten a conversation and can potentially enlighten what we know about viruses, immunology, a lot of things. But we're so, as a society, we're in such a weird place because people get mad at you for even bringing up the thought, like, oh God, how dare you?
Why do people
you know
get
what I mean?
mad,
People
though,
get
bro?
so crazy about it, man.
But-
It's like
but
that's
you-
how science works. You have to challenge
why
those
do people get
ideas,
mad?
right?
Exactly.
You have to.
You have to challenge. And you know what, like when you come across people who do get really upset like that, I feel like the people that get the most upset are the ones who are like the most educated
Yeah.
and like feel like they have something to lose.
It's
in
a
that
systematic reaction. I think
yes,
they're
it's-
so ingrained in the system.
That's correct.
that-
They're so ingrained. They're like, how could you
Right.
say that?
How
But that's
dare
a-
you
but
even
you need
pose
to-
the question?
But that's a heart check though, because
Yeah, it's a heart check.
they need to be able to, you want to be able to learn
Right.
so that you could better help.
Yeah. And at the end of
But
the day,
instead they just shut down and they want to get,
right. And like not asking questions, that in turn is anti-science.
That's
It's like,
anti-science.
that's how you make science better. That's what we've done for years and years and years. That's how we are where we are.
That
We
is
have to be
correct.
asking questions.
That
It's
is
human nature too. I mean, you've written screenplays, right, Evan?
Yeah.
How pissed off do you get when somebody knocks your
challenges
challenges it, and they're like,
100%. No, you do.
like, this character wouldn't do this. And
Exactly.
you're like, what the hell would you know?
how
Did
do
you write
know?
the script? Yeah.
How do you know? Yeah, you do. It is human reaction
It's
for
human
sure.
reaction.
But yeah, I mean, man, it's like as a culture, we got to get past it, right? We got to
Yeah.
be more open to this idea of yes, pose questions. Like
That's right.
you might be right, you might be
Okay.
totally wrong about it, but at least ask the question,
That's
right?
correct.
You know,
let's think about this though, right? The evolution of the vaccine. Okay, so what was it? George Washington.
I was like, what is it?
So,
The coffee maker just turned
oh, it
off
was
on its
okay.
own. It's like what?
George Washington, smallpox,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
So-
Smallpox is one of the first things that we dealt with from a contagion
Yeah.
type of theory. Uh-huh.
So they, correct me if I'm wrong, but they were going door to door with an individual who was affected by smallpox, but introducing that to healthy individuals,
Mhm.
right? Therefore, that individual was able to build antibodies,
Mhm.
right, to better equip the terrain. And I mean, in that sense, it makes total. I mean, it clicks, right? I mean, I get it, right?
Where there's contagion that is a possibility.
right?
Yeah.
Like specifically talking about like the smallpox
Right.
thing, but what that they
Right.
were doing back then. I
Right.
mean, you know,
Well,
like,
the smallpox thing is what everybody falls back onto when they're talking about like vaccine
Yeah.
efficacy, right?
And
What
one
do
thing
you say about smallpox?
one thing I would probably say in with that is that we didn't really know like what the nutritional state was for a lot of those individuals that contracted, smallpox and didn't do well with it.
Yeah.
I always go
Yeah.
back to measles. Measles was, so common back in the 30s and the 40s. I mean, it was like, again, a rite of passage. Almost like when I was a child, it was a rite of passage to have chicken pox.
Yeah.
Like, hey, you get chicken pox,
Yeah.
you got to stay at home until you're recuperated from it. But I think that when it comes to, again, contagion, I think that there is a reality in that.
uh-huh.
But to say that is the only way that
Right.
people
Sure.
contract infections
Yeah.
or deal with infections or test positive for an infection is we need to think beyond it just came from somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And we already know like Lyme. I mean, a lot of people you hear talk about Lyme. Lyme is a really chronic infection for a lot of individuals. We were taught back in medical school that these are intracellular bacteria. They're called spirochetes, mycoplasma pneumonia, chlamydia pneumonia. These are also intracellular bacteria. So they kind of hide out in the cell. And then when the person's, again, constitution or terrain is weakened,
Uh-huh.
then they come out to play and they cause infection.
So you could be a carrier of
You could
Lyme,
be a carrier. You could be a carrier of Lyme.
not even have any symptoms.
That's correct. You can be a carrier of Epstein-Barr virus and not have any symptoms, which is mono. And then all of a sudden, one day you travel, you don't sleep well, you got an exam coming up, work project, you're really tired, and then all of a sudden you have mono.
Yeah.
Bro, I got smacked with mono one time, dude.
Yeah. And you think, oh my gosh,
Bad.
who was I around that gave me mono? Well, maybe it was you that had it all the time.
Yeah.
Dude,
Yeah, sure.
and I'm telling you, because this was Brittany and I were married. I'm in my mid 20s, and all of a sudden I get mono, which you think everybody hears like the kissing disease, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, what the heck, bro?
Yeah, Brittany's like, hey,
Dude, I'm like,
what's
yeah.
up?
No, seriously. I'm like, no. I'm thinking, I'm trying to, in my head, I'm like, all right, so I went to the barber shop. He edged me up. Like, did I get it from there? I was at the gym. Like, what? I don't know, but it was not fun. But I could have been a carrier, obviously. And
Yeah,
it
sure.
just under stress, being a.
And we know that about shingles and stuff too. I mean,
Yeah.
people know that that's a dormant virus that
Wow.
comes out when you
Right,
get stressed.
right.
But I tell you what, though, that was the virus I was talking about with Ganino.
Yeah.
Because I went to Ganino's clinic and I did 2 or 3 days back to back of IV therapies. Bro, mono is not fun, dude. But
Knocked it
I
out
was
like a
able
couple
to
days,
kick
You
right?
feel, you feel a lot better after.
bro, because dude, I mean, the worst sore throat, just fever, but I was able to kick it pretty quick because I was reading like it would hang with people for an average of 14 days plus.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But I was like,
You knock it
let's
out.
get that vitamin C.
Yeah,
that,
seriously, man.
Vitamin C can be really effective. I have a dad in the practice. I think he's still out at Texas A&M. He was like, hey, Dr. Naidoo, have you heard about human endogenous retroviruses? I'm like, what? And he's like, yeah, we're doing all this research at Texas A&M about human endogenous retroviruses. And that's kind of like where I started getting even more like into this, like, hey, when we test individuals for different genetic, codes, what are we testing? Maybe we're testing, these human endogenous retroviruses as well. So,
That's interesting.
And so it says endogenous retroviruses are remnants of retroviral infections. They preserve functions of exogenous retroviruses to various extents. ERVs are both parasites and symbionts, although the most pathogenic elements are eliminated by selection. Some pathogenicity may remain. What does that mean?
So
layman's terms.
Yeah.
What they're saying is that, there's things that are living in our bodies.
You're
like
born with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or that have integrated into our bodies over time that we've learned how to kind of assimilate with. And so when we test, our genetic code, and this goes back to another part of like what we call junk DNA. I think many of you probably know, like from basic sciences, it's even told us to us like in high school about like 95% of our DNA is junk and only 5% of it's really like what we use. And we're learning every day that it becomes less and less from 95%. Now it's 90% or it's 85%. So how much of that DNA that we don't know about actually has relevance to how our bodies work or don't work? And this right here with these endogenous retroviruses are incorporated into that genetic code that we thought was like junk DNA.
So you inherited these diseases potentially. Yeah.
And I don't even like to say disease. I like to say like we just inherited these genetic sequences, these codes.
Well, isn't there a theory out there that says however many humans have the HPV, human papillomavirus? Isn't there a theory out there that says that it's beneficial in some way that virus fights another virus? Have you heard that?
I haven't, but it wouldn't surprise me if that there's that case that there's some sort of immune protection from having that particular, virus.
Well, that was a question that Katie had from her poll was like,
yeah, she was saying like, are you a fan of that vaccine?
No,
is it something?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No. It has the highest amount of aluminum of any vaccine.
It
that's
does,
out there.
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And Dr. Yehuda Schoenfeld has addressed in his book Vaccines and Autoimmunity, and even with the lecture that he gave at one of the conferences that I went to, about how aluminum damages the terminal point of where the nerve interacts with the artery. So like when you stand up, your artery has to compress to maintain its blood pressure. Because if your artery just stayed the same diameter, then as you stand up, you'd pass out. Your blood vessels have to constrict. Well, when you have that damage to that neuron, that nerve ending with that aluminum, now when you stand up, you have to have that artery compress, and it can't because it's not getting the sensation or the information from that neuron, and hence people pass out. And that's why we have a lot of young ladies who end up having these passing out, feeling dizzy, faint after doing the HPV vaccine.
So the argument I think for aluminum
it's like
is that
they call it a small nerve neuropathy.
The case for aluminum is that it boosts the immune response. Is that right?
Yes.
But this just has like an abundance of it, you're saying?
Yeah, it just has a higher amount. And I don't know why. I mean,
yeah.
I haven't delved into it. I mean, I remember the HPV vaccine came out when I first went active duty in 2006. And I remember one of the reps came by and I told her, I was like, what is this vaccine? Like, why are we giving it? Who's it for? And at that time, it was only recommended for women who were like sexually active, like beyond the
That's what I remember it being with too. Yeah.
Beyond the pediatric years. And so we had a lot of active duty women who were getting the HPV vaccine. And a lot of them were, having these fainting spells after getting the vaccine.
Okay. So fainting spells. Do you guys remember a nurse named Tiffany Dover?
No.
My name is
Look this
Tiffany
up,
Dover,
Brett. Do you know about this?
and I am the
Dover?
manager in
Tiffany Dover got
CCU. For my team,
the COVID
I remember
vaccine on live TV and immediately
Yeah.
passed out.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
she had an Instagram
And I
account.
know that,
Okay, wait.
um,
Made Tiffany Dover into an anti-vaccine icon. She's finally
really
ready to talk. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, wait, hold up. I didn't see this. So is
she's
she
now
live?
she's
So-
anti.
I'm sorry.
So the last point that I had gotten down this rabbit hole, she her Instagram went blank for a couple years, and then somebody hacked her account, and they were like releasing like pieces of people who had DM'd her and like all this, and they were like saying, yeah, like just based off of this, we don't think she's alive. So this is interesting. I want to.
Yeah, it just says that he was watching her on live stream when she was the first people to get the vaccine. I was also watching when she fainted immediately after.
Who's talking right now?
This is the writer, Brandy.
Okay.
Droncy.
Tiffany Dover is alive, sitting across from Tiffany at her kitchen table. This is obvious. She breathes in and out. She gestures with her hands. She laughs generously. Okay. I didn't die, Tiffany tells me, but the life I knew did. Ooh.
Yeah.
So what
Ooh,
happened?
This is good.
So she's now like anti-vax.
So,
or what?
the people were saying that it was either something where she just felt like she's now kind of used as this icon against vaccines, and she didn't know if she wanted to be. But it was a sort of a bizarre thing because she never came out and said one way or like the other. Like, hey guys, no, I got nervous. I passed out. I'm totally fine. Nobody freak out. Like, I feel like that would have eliminated a lot of this conspiracy talk about it.
But with that passing out, like with her,
yeah,
from a physiology standpoint, we know that with COVID, the actual infection, but even with the vaccine, the spike protein is creating a level of inflammation in the arteries. So for temporary, or it might even be for a longer period of time, that person's artery is actually more narrow.
okay.
So if you have an individual who's like, maybe on the brink of having a heart attack, or maybe already has really bad heart disease, that when you do that vaccine, it's not helping the situation at all because it's decreasing the diameter of the blood vessels. And when you
Interesting.
decrease the diameter of the blood vessels, you get poorer blood flow, you get poor oxygen delivery, you have fatigue, you have dyspnea, you can't do things like you did before.
Yeah.
And that's the pathophysiology, the mechanism behind it.
Tiffany Dover's alive.
I'm going to see if I
That's
can find
good.
the video.
That's good. Praise
Yeah.
God. That's a
Yeah.
good thing.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
But I can only imagine for her, because it's when you have people who like are really conventional minded,
Yeah.
and they just think like, the world of allopathic medicine, which I'm an allopathic physician.
Yeah.
And then you take a treatment or something and it doesn't work the way you wanted. It's hard. Like there's so much you got to process. Like,
There is also, they got a bunch of like photos in of the nurses like after the fact with this, and they got a photo, and dude, like the girl in a mask has like long dark hair similar to hers, but like you can tell it's not the same person at all. It's just a girl in a mask who they're calling like has like her name tag on and everything.
Oh my god!
It's like it
Trying to
just got
reenact
so
it.
weird. Well, the problem with it is that it got so weird, and they were trying to like hide it for so long that it's just like, of course, people are gonna like think like, why this is weird. This doesn't make any sense.
because that happened on live television. when she said it.
Exactly.
You know what I love about you, Doc, is this, man. You and so many others that are like you is that you're constantly wanting to learn and to get better so that you can help others to get better.
Yeah, that's a valid point for sure.
There's a lot
You're
of
not-
doctors in the, American Medical Society or Western, medicine that just is handed the info and that's all they stick to. But like you, Dr. Mahoney, Dr. Ganino, and others that we know, it's constantly researching, constantly diving into this, going to different seminars and
Yes.
Mhm.
and talking to other people that are like-minded and or even challenging things to learn to get better. That's everybody.
That's noble.
That's noble, and that should be like a clear example of like a good physician.
Yeah,
So
that's what you want in a doctor.
That's what
right?
you want.
Like, I do think it's probably easy for a doctor to go to medical school, pay all of the money that takes, do all of that training, and then get to a point where it's like, all right, opened up my own thing, seeing patients. I'm not going to question. I'm not going to get up against the board or any of that, and just live a very, very comfortable life.
Yeah.
Live a very comfortable life and not have to get any pushback or,
Right.
So yeah, I mean, kudos for pushing against and trying to find what's actually true, what's actually not true. I think
And if you haven't,
So appreciate that.
yeah, man, I mean, like also too, like if you haven't ruffled the feathers of like the system,
yeah.
then I mean, you're not. I mean,
Has there been any pushback with like the board or anything against you?
I've had a few like things, complaints filed, but it's been things that, been very, I wouldn't say frivolous,
Yeah.
but you show them the evidence of what you're doing and they know that you're taking, one thing that I've always tried to be about is I'm not in the business of trying to create an enemy.
Sure.
yeah,
And so I'm always trying to educate. And I have a lot of colleagues who are on the other side of the aisle. And whenever they, ask me, if they were to ask me, I'll let them know, like, what my thinking is on a certain thing or what my premise is on a certain thing. And it's kind of interesting. I'll get some patients, I'll ask them, like, well, how did you hear about the practice? Oh, well, my pediatrician told me about you. What? The pediatrician told, like they told me to come to you. I'm like, you're a regular pediatrician. Like, yeah. They said, if you're going to go to somebody that's kind of like, out of the box.
cool, man.
So
That is cool.
I like the fact that I have that relationship, grew up here in this area,
Yeah,
that I went to residency here.
Yeah.
I know all the docs. And so I think that they respect me, that they know, like, I'm not just some kind of mind body yoga master type of person. I'm practicing medicine.
Right.
yeah,
Trying-
absolutely.
Trying to find the right way to keep a child healthy,
Dr. Ganino was on yesterday, and he told us an instance where he was helping a patient, and like they got better, but then was like got a letter in the mail, basically, getting pushback.
Yeah.
But
He
it
didn't
was
treat it. He didn't treat it in the correct way, in the what is it? In the standard of American care, or this
Protocol.
standard of care, I think.
standard.
They
But
said,
never
right?
mind the fact
Wasn't
that
it?
Yeah,
the
basically
patient was
stop
able to
doing
get
what you're
better
doing.
and get
Yeah.
healed. It was just you didn't
Yeah.
do it.
You didn't do
properly.
this the right way.
Which just blows
You got
my
'em better.
mind, man.
Yeah.
They're okay.
But you didn't do
They
it
made
by
it.
the guideline. And I think that's kind of changing too. Like Aaron Siri with the ICANN network. I think all of the constructs that we've had for vaccines, that's all like falling apart.
Yeah.
I mean, and it all happened as I kind of go back to COVID. I'm like,
Mhm.
I don't know what the meaning. I don't know what was a driver then. I almost feel like it was just like a sin thing. Like it was just such an evil force that was upon people that it just pushed them over the edge.
Yeah.
And they could have had probably a happy-go-lucky life had they not pushed that vaccine, and people kind of would have still been,
Mhm.
impartial about it.
Mhm.
But that whole process just unraveled.
That was the
It
silver
really
lining
did,
of it
wasn't
all,
it?
bro.
Yeah.
And it wasn't
Yeah.
just COVID that it unraveled. It unraveled the vaccine industry, the
Mhm.
childhood vaccine schedule. So now, like, I don't even think that boards really want to get involved in that because they're like, hey, we don't even have a lot of ground to stand on right now
Yeah.
to say, like, hey, this is the standard of care and this is the way that it has to be done. When there's all these FOIA requests and things that have come out now, like, hey, we've been playing on a house of cards
Yeah.
that is crumbling,
Right. Right.
And so
What do you think if Robert Kennedy Jr. was able to become the head of the health? What is he? Was he?
HSS,
Yeah.
Health and
Yeah.
Human Secretary.
Yeah.
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 What do you think that would do? Because he's
You know-
like-minded like us when it comes to that, isn't he?
So I listened to a gentleman by the name of Dr. Shiva Adhari, and Dr. Shiva Adhari was a person who founded email when he was like 14 or 15 years old. He's an MIT systems-based scientist. And one thing I tell my family now, like, I'm not a red person, I'm not a blue person. I used to be. I mean, I ran for school board. I was on the GOP ticket, when I ran for school board. And I learned a lot through that process. And I think everybody at their core wants, like, if they have a child, everybody wants their child to be well,
Mhm.
whether you're a Democrat or Republican
Mhm.
or whoever you are, right?
Yeah.
You want your child to be able to like have a good living, be able to have a job, be able to sustain themselves. So with RFK, I think he's done some very, very noble work with the Children's Health Defense Fund, because you could see it. There's content that's out there that if people read it, it's going to change the way that they think.
Yeah.
Which I'm extremely indebted to him for doing that. And I hope that when he gets into whatever position he will be allowed to get into, that he can continue to carry out that same message, that it's not watered down. Sometimes, and this is what Shiva talks about, like when people are upset and angry and want to revolt and rebel, it's like we'll bring up this leader that everybody says, okay, like he or she's going to change everything for us. And then we forget to do things at the grassroots level.
Yeah.
We still need to be as motivated as we were before, whoever gets into office, of continuing to try to change things at the grassroots level and not wait for like, quote unquote, a savior to come and help us.
Yeah, for
well
sure.
said. 100%.
Yeah, absolutely love that,
Yeah.
man. I love the way you said that.
And that's just one of the things that I just kind of got into, because I love Trump, back in 2020. I still like him, but there's a lot of stuff that happened in those 4 years when he was in office that really didn't change.
Yeah.
And so like I wanted things to change.
Yeah.
And it didn't. So then that was a wake up call to me. And that's kind of why I ran for school board, was like, okay, well, I'm going to try to affect the change that I can control. That I
Things
can do.
definitely change now, though.
Yeah. And right. And he's not in office.
Yeah.
And and people are still like at the grassroots level, they're wanting more. And that's what I love about America. And it's a country that was founded on those principles of like, hey, we didn't like it how it was back where we were, so we're going to change it now. We're going to do something different. And I think that mindset is still there.
Yeah.
Still there, very entrenched. I'm
a fan of RFK. The first time that I heard him on the Joe Rogan podcast, Brittany and I were driving to Florida with the kids, and we were listening to it, and he's talking about how he got into, litigating for vaccine injuries.
Yeah, he's very big in environmental.
I was like listening to him educate Joe Rogan like on this, and just the passion that he has for the kids and just health in general. I was like, man, this dude is advocating like in the right way.
Right.
Yeah.
And
really
good for
cool.
Joe Rogan for being open-minded to
Yes.
it, because for the longest time, Rogan's been super, super for vaccines.
Yeah.
And, good for him for having somebody on who would challenge that point of view, right?
Absolutely.
That's important. So
Absolutely.
yeah, man, good for him.
And bring it to the mainstream.
That was a
Yes.
good show, by the way.
It was really good, dude. I was
Very
sharing it
enlightening.
with everybody,
Yeah.
dude.
Yeah.
I will say, though, I did produce a podcast for Glenn Beck and RFK Jr., and when Glenn pressed him on ESG, which is environmental social governance investing, that's gotten us into this whole situation that we're in now with BlackRock and whatnot, he played dumb, which I was surprised.
Oh,
by.
really?
He acted like he didn't know what ESG was. And
Whoa,
I'm thinking,
really?
Oh, no kidding. Really?
No
Bro, what
way
year
a
was
man
that?
who picked Silicon Valley for his vice president
Ah.
doesn't know what ESG is.
Brett,
Yeah.
what year was that when you did that?
That was 4 months ago, 5 months ago.
See,
Interesting.
Okay.
Okay.
And it's on YouTube.
Hold
so
up.
anybody watching this now, go check out the podcast with RFK and Glenn Beck. And
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I mean,
but that's politicians in general.
Dude,
Yeah.
it
right?
is. That's,
They're all
that's
full of
yes,
shit.
Yes, that's exactly it. I mean, nobody's gonna, do it perfectly. You can't expect them to.
And we can't have a yes or no answer. And I think that's there's so much context because government has gotten so big that everything requires so much context that you can't just give a yes or no answer anymore.
Agree 100%.
And that just means it's too big and it's got to.
it's like, what do you believe? Well, whatever is going to help me get elected.
What
Yes.
does my base think? Yeah.
Yes.
I believe whatever my base thinks.
Yeah, I mean,
basically,
go look at Chuck Schumer talking about border policy and what's going to happen if we let illegal immigration run rampant in this country, and he was adamantly against it. Chuck Schumer was, and now he's like,
now
we need
he's
the
all-
workers.
yeah, right.
Oh yeah.
What, you know,
100%,
flavor of the
man.
month.
Politicians, man.
Yeah, it's 4:45 right now, Mark.
No, is
Your
that
phone's
camera
off.
still on?
No, that camera just died too.
My camera?
Yeah,
Oh.
That's why my wife
phone
won't let me
died too.
run for school board
falling
again.
apart here.
Do we get the master?
Sammy says,
All
You're
right.
not- you're not
yeah,
cut
boy,
for,
it's a cannon energy.
politics, Randy. You're too honest. I'm like, well, I think that's like what God wants us to be, right? Congruent in everything that we do.
Yeah.
Like the person that we are with our family is the same person that we are.
I agree.
You know, in our workspace.
I agree, but the problem is that the system doesn't reward that. You know what I mean?
No.
Like, you can. Like, I agree with you. Like, I think that's noble. I think that's amazing. I think that's exactly how we ought to act. But I don't think the system is going to reward honesty and transparency.
The world system won't.
Right.
Hopefully, though, some of us who like, you know, have businesses and things can have companies that do bring that mindset there. So those people that work with us have that comfort level. And that's what I try to promote, you know, at the office is that, hey, the same person that you are away from the office, that's the kind of person that I need you to be here. Yeah. So if you care about your kids, then I want you to care about these children that we take care of, right? And, you know, if that parent is frustrated because they haven't gotten an answer on something, well, how would you be if you were there on that side, you know? So those are the things. And I think like another gentleman who's in our practice, one of the docs, we talked a while back when I interviewed him, and we talked about burnout. You have burnout when you're doing any sort of like objective and it's not really what you want to do, right? Eventually you're going to get burnout. No matter how much money you make, no matter how much success you have, deep within your core, you know if that's in alignment with who you are.
Yep.
So that's what we're trying to create with the practices is that as a provider, what you believe at your core, you're allowed to do in terms of caring for your patient.
Yeah.
And
I love that, man.
And most providers don't get that opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it's true.
Man,
it's a good show, man.
Good stuff.
So we started on multivitamins.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. We went down the whole spectrum, man. That's down the whole spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, kind of going back to the whole, you know, multivitamin thing. I think again with like immune support type of stuff, you know, I think I wish more and more parents do this because I deal with this. Like I just saw probably about 20 sick kids on Friday. And I asked the parents, I'm like, hey, what do you have at home? Like when your child's not feeling well, do you have any vitamin D? Do you have any briar rose? Do you have any elderberry? No, I don't have any of those things. Why don't you have those things? You're in our practice. You know, we talk about those things, but I just think like, hopefully when we do things like this, it'll create that level of dialogue with
That's what we want.
Oh, for sure.
That's what we want.
Exactly.
We want because
we want to make change too.
Yeah.
You know,
that's what we want. We want to be able to help work side by side with you and other like-minded individuals.
Yeah.
So appreciate that.
You want to land it for us, Evan?
I'll land it. All right. Dr. Naidoo, thank you so much, man, for being on, educating. Awesome show, of course. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys like this content, please subscribe. Please like this video. Please tell a friend. And we'll catch you guys on the next one.